My name is Lisa McNamara, and I lead the Global Knowledge Program of the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, CDKN. And CDKN works in 3 regions, Africa, Asia, and South America. And it's coordinated by an NGO South North based in South Africa and managed by a network of non-profit organizations across the world, ICCCAD South Asia in Delhi, FLA in Quito, and the Overseas Development Institute based in London. And we're funded by Canada's IDRC and the Royal Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I just asked that everybody mute their microphone as we get going. Thank you very much. So it's great that we have this interface where we're not doing a webinar, and we can interact in a Zoom meeting format, but we just have to have our microphones muted throughout. So the CDK network has been working since 2010 to support climate compatible development, and we really have a concerted focus on bridging the gap between knowledge and action and supporting evidence-based decision-making on climate change. And in bridging this gap between knowledge and action on the ground, knowledge brokers really play a very important role. And we've been focusing more and more on the role of knowledge brokering in bringing about change in the global south, and hence the topic of today. So I will be moderating the discussion with my colleague Lucia. And today's session is going to be quite interactive. We're going to have a talk show, we're going to have breakout groups, and then Albert Norstrom from the Global Resilience Partnership will also be reflecting on the discussion afterwards in terms of what we've been learning about enhancing community resilience in the time of COVID. So we're going to link to COVID in the last part of the discussion and also in the talk show. I'd also just like to first quickly start with some Zoom etiquette, just so that you know the session is being recorded. So it will go up on the Gobeshona website at some point, and we will also share it on the CDKN website. Please do keep your microphone on mute. There are quite a lot of us on the call, so it's important that we just keep it on mute unless you're speaking. If your internet connection does allow, try and keep your video on. I know it's quite tricky with data costs, etc., and bandwidth, but if you can manage it, do keep your video on. Please feel free to use the chat box to ask questions throughout the session. We will be launching a Zoom poll at the end for monitoring and evaluation purposes, and please do make sure you complete it before you leave. And yeah, just be fully present in the session, and we really look forward to engaging with you in the next 2 hours. To start off with, it's always nice to get to know who's in the Zoom room with us. If you can just click on the menti.com link in the chat and go through to Menti and let us know where you're joining us from. What country are you joining us from today? You'll see that once you've completed that question, there'll be another question asking you your gender, if you can also complete that. And there's another question asking us your sector organization, type of organization, just so we can get a sense of like where people are coming from. So we have the results slowly showing up on the screen. We might have a bit of a lag. UK, South Africa, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. Great. So in terms of what type of organization, we work, lots of researchers and NGOs, some government representatives at the national and subnational level. We have the female and male contingent are sort of equal. Let's see if it remains so. I do see a lot of women joining us, so nice gender balance, and lots of NGOs, yes. And a few representatives from donor organizations. Lots of people from Bangladesh, which would make sense. I'll just give it one more little moment just to allow for the lag, because I know we've got people from Kenya joining us, Ghana, so quite a geographic spread, Zambia, Pakistan, that might not be showing up on the Menti. Beijing, great. Okay, I think we can now, what we would like to do now, we're going to stay on Menti because but we can start screen sharing again in the interest of time. Given that this is a session about knowledge brokering and the role of knowledge brokers, we would like to just get a little bit of a sense of how you understand knowledge brokering and what knowledge brokering means to you. So you'll see there 4 pictures on the screen depicting different things, 4 options. And if you can click on the Menti link in the chat and just let us know which option best depicts knowledge brokering for you. You can choose one, you can choose a number of them. It's up to you. It's a multiple answer option. And you can just let us know what depicts knowledge brokering for you. There is a bit of a lag with the screen share. Apologies for that. It is a bit blurry. And hopefully we are able to see the responses. The pictures are quite small in the Menti, which is why we were also showing them on screen. Okay, so quite a lot of people are saying option 4, which is interesting. More people responding for option 2 and 4 than 1 and 3. Let's see how it goes. There's less of a lag with this Menti, thankfully. So I know we've already got some resistance for the word brokering. So my colleague Lucia will be sharing a little bit about how we understand knowledge brokering now, and we can talk a bit about the different ways of understanding brokering and some of the more negative connotations of the word brokering, which we do also find often coming up. So we can have a look at that now. Great. Okay, I think we can carry on. I'm now going to hand over to Lucia, who's going to just talk a little bit about how we understanding knowledge brokering, different ways of defining knowledge brokering, and the many different roles that knowledge brokers play in bringing about change. I'll hand over to you, Lucia.
Great, everyone. Welcome also from me. So nice to see so many known faces and names in the participant list, and also many that I do not know. So welcome, everyone. So as you know, today's session is about understanding the role of knowledge brokers and change agents in enhancing community resilience. So here the key word is really this broker's work. And as Lisa was mentioning, as Mizan commented in the chat, like there is indeed resistance, because normally what we understand by brokers is, or by the concept of brokering, is that there is a transaction between, for example, stockbrokers, or like it's used, for example, in the real estate world or in the insurance world. So normally you will also see in the next picture, the broker is a middleman. He is, or she is someone who is between a buyer and a seller, and normally earns a commission from the work that they do. And therefore there is like this transaction that happens, and I think that is what gives it quite a bad connotation, where we try to use it in a different context. So CDKN has worked quite a lot on this concept of knowledge brokering in its entire life, let's say. And what we understand, like as we have started to undertake more reflection processes about this in the past year or so, is you will see in the third picture, somebody who is a link between like producers of information and users of information. So for example, in the case of like climate knowledge, they really like are connecting the researchers on one side and the users that may be decision makers, they may be practitioners, they may be communities who need that information in order to take better decisions. So they really like strengthen like the process of generation of that knowledge, its dissemination, and really its use. So you will see on the next slide that there is a whole spectrum though, and this is really what that Mentimeter was talking to. Like what we understand by knowledge brokering, like sometimes is quite limited, but if you will see on this on the spectrum, you can see that like if we go from left to right, on the furthest left, like knowledge brokers have a role of like mediation of information. So this is really like a disseminating role. So for example, that first option in the Mentimeter was a knowledge portal with climate information. So this is a bit more of a one-way unidirectional flow of information, but knowledge brokers enable like to, people to access information that otherwise would not make it out there, and through multiple sources. Then there is like they can do more than that. However, if we go to the second like category, here there sorry, still previous slide, thank you. Here they're like also translating the information. So like they are basically like making it more understandable, more digestible, and they really help people make sense of it. So for example, you will have seen a policy brief that is a succinct way of summarizing often like research information. So that was one of the other categories on the Mentimeter. So these two categories probably is not what you often associate with knowledge brokering, if I see the results of that poll, but they are also part of that. Then the third category is really like a knowledge broker, him or herself, like and this is when we like bring people together to help them like make sense of the information, like so we improve the use of knowledge in decision making by undertaking more participatory processes. So for example, these may be also processes that lead to the co-production of knowledge, where people from different sectors, from different governance levels come together and produce information together. However, knowledge brokers also go beyond this. So they may be innovation brokers in the last category. So here they're really trying to like foster more systemic change. So they identify certain barriers, like systemic barriers in a system, like power differentials or like governance disconnects, and they really try to address these issues so that like they provide a more enabling environment for change to happen. And so in the next slide, you will see that like based on this, we understand that knowledge brokers really like have a large variety of roles. So, like they help to bring synergy about, like by connecting stakeholders and projects and programs and pieces of work. They facilitate collaboration. As you will see, like there are intermediaries and communicators. So those first two categories, translators in the middle one, but they also like really are networkers and change agents as well. So like all of these roles really are there to like try to bridge this gap between knowledge and action, between like the production of knowledge and its use. So this is like, what we understand by knowledge brokering in CDKN, and these variety of roles is what we want to talk about a bit more today. So we will now move on to the talk show that Lisa is going to be hosting, and I will reconnect in a little bit. So thank you and enjoy the talk show.
Great. I'm now going to put my talk show host hat on. Okay, super. Okay, you are now watching Knowledge Brokering Live. And today we're going to be talking about the role of knowledge brokering in strengthening community resilience, and especially more vulnerable groups, in Ghana, India, and more widely around the world. And we will be looking at brokers enabling resilience in the face of climate impacts, but also more recently in enabling communities to cope with COVID-19, being many lessons that we can learn from the COVID crisis for the climate crisis. We are joined by 3 very interesting guests. First, we would like to welcome Prince Ansah from the University of Ghana. Prince and his team at the university have been working for a number of years now, experimenting with different innovative ways for local research to reach remote communities and farmers in Ghana, from establishing physical resource centers, climate resource centers, to radio shows, a mobile app, the creation of songs for local women on specific topics, and much more. We're going to learn a bit more about that now. We're also very pleased to have Nivedita from the Gorakhpur Environmental Action Group in India, and GIAG is working in the context of peri-urban areas specifically. And they are focusing on the relationship between peri-urban and urban areas and how this links to resilience. They use 3 key approaches for knowledge brokering, but their approach has really been from the bottom up. If you look at the left-hand side of the slide, so starting from field interventions and engaging with communities, citizens, farmers, and then moving on to conducting research for specifically influencing policy, and then doing training activities, including peer learning. And then last but not least, thank you to Shahrin Mannan for being here today. Shahrin is from the International Center for Climate Change and Development, and she is the coordinator of the Voices from the Frontline initiative. And this is led by ICCCAD with CDKN and the Global Resilience Partnership. And Voices from the Frontline is really a series of stories on community-led efforts to build resilience in the face of COVID. And the stories really provide an overwhelming evidence of the critical role that grassroots organizations are playing in responding to the pandemic, and including playing a role of brokers of valuable information, resources, know-how, etc. 29 stories have been published to date, and you can find them on the ICCCAD and CDKN websites. And we will share the links in the chat now to those 2 websites. Great. So we want to make sure that we record all the rich lessons from the show. So Lucia will be in the background. She'll be noting the key messages emerging on a Padlet. So Padlet's an online tool, which is also being shared in the chat now. And you're welcome to sit back and enjoy the show, or you can also contribute to the Padlet as we go along. It's really up to you and what you would like to do, if you want to be in listening mode or engaging mode. And then questions. Please, can you make sure you can type questions in the chat box if you have any questions for our guests, our talk show guests. There actually won't be time for a formal Q&A, but our guests will try to answer in the chat. And then we will also be having breakout groups where you'll have another chance to speak directly to the guest show hosts in the breakout groups. So there will be time for engaging more deeply with them. Now, since this is live TV broadcasting and we have the news coming up next, we can't run over time. So I will be keeping to time very strictly. So I will raise a white card to indicate how much time is left. And when I raise the white card, you'll have 1 minute left, guests. And then when I raise the red card, your time is up and we have to move on. And the guests will have 3 minutes each to respond to the different questions. Okay, are we ready? So question, I think we're going to first start off with Prince. Prince, can you tell us what knowledge brokering processes and approaches have you used and your team to enhance the resilience of vulnerable groups? What specific processes and approaches are you using?
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Hi, everyone. We've been using various tools and approaches for enhancing resilience. The processes in general is, the first of all, is the information available before you do anything I think it has to do with the quality of information that you have, or the research, or whatever information that you want to disseminate. And with us, was through research that we did through the Ansah project, and also through a lot of participatory processes, workshop meetings. That's where we generated those information or those knowledge from at the local level. From there, we moved to the tools, the local tools available. By local tools available, I mean the tools that are already being used at a local level to disseminate information. So in this case, we realized that things like tools like radio, using radio programs, using songs at the local level, and also using community meetings, like community gatherings. That is where, those are the most powerful tools that are used to communicate any information to the various audiences at the local level. From there, we as a group, our researchers or team of implementers also identify what are the gaps within this already existing tools that we can enhance or we can bring on board. And that is where we also introduce the mobile app, which was specifically directed to the local, the NGOs and then the extension officers who can actually have access to internet, and then also be able to access knowledge when we provide them on mobile app platforms. And also we use what we call the climate advisory resource centers. These are also trying to use audiovisuals to communicate various actions or implementation action strategies in the local language, which was set up within the Ministry of Agriculture local offices, which was also very helpful. We also used what we call the climate information resource centers. These were also attached in various schools for the youth, specifically for the youth. From there, we also came to a point where we have to be flexible in terms of the way we operate. So in this case, we also try to, especially in the COVID era, where the meetings as a form of tool for engagement was no more available. So we had to use what we call the Zoom process. So we connected the resource centers to Zoom and to other online platforms where local stakeholders could actually join in or come to the center, and then facilitators from all over the world can actually train them or take them through whatever strategies or whatever they had to do. So these are some of the key processes that we used based on different audiences. So we target audiences based on what they can best receive that information and use it. So we're not only interested in just receiving the information, but what's the best tool to be able, our process to be able to use in order to take the information and at the same time use it. So these are some of the few things that I can mention. And all this happen at the local level. All these are local level activities. Especially with the mobile app, I should say, it's been now trying to be extended to the national level since the government has taken interest in it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and excellent timekeeping. Lots of diverse approaches there. Thank you very much, Prince. Now, I'd like to move on to Nivedita from GIAG. Can you tell us a bit about the processes, approaches, tools that you're using in your knowledge brokering work? It seems Nivedita is
Yes.
muted. Are you there?
Yeah, I wasn't
great.
able to unmute myself. It was asking for host rights. Thank you so much, Lisa, for that question. So yes, under the CDKN knowledge brokering project, the Gorakhpur Environmental Action Group in India has been focusing on bridging the knowledge gaps on the issue of peri-urban ecosystems, which are very important for building urban resilience in urban areas. And not only for urban areas, but the resilience of peri-urban areas itself is very important, and the livelihoods of the people who are living there. So talking about the key approaches that we have adopted through this whole process for knowledge brokering is, one is that we have been working with the Rockefeller Foundation on the peri-urban ecosystems peri-urban agriculture and developing the peri-urban spaces, which are important for urban resilience for a long period of time. And so we have built on the ground experiences on the important connect between the peri-urban areas and the urban resilience that it actually lends. So the first step was we adopted a bottom-up approach. We built on the ground experiences. We implemented field-level projects from where the experiences were generated. The second level was the second approach level was that we collaborated with very key strategic institutions in the country, which are responsible for training and capacity building around these issues, which are also responsible for policy mainstreaming on the whole issue of peri-urban and urban resilience. And at the third level, I would say the third approach that we adopted was also networking with other organizations, other government organizations, academic institutions, civil society organizations, and researchers and academicians who are working in the same space to create that critical mass of knowledge around this whole issue of the connect between peri-urban and urban resilience. In India, we still have very less field level experience on this whole issue. So this collaboration and this networking with key organizations was very essential, very much needed to build a critical mass of knowledge through which advocacy, through which policy mainstreaming and capacity building activities are being done. So some of the key approaches that come to my mind immediately are these, Lisa.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Nivedita. I see there's a question for you in the chat, Prince, if you have access to any of those songs and if you could share them in any accessible format if they're available. Okay, great. I think let's move now on to Shahrin. Shahrin, who will speak a little bit about the voices from the front line and some of the processes and approaches that community leaders, grassroots organizations are taking to broker knowledge in face of the climate, in face of the COVID pandemic.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa. I think I'll speak with my VFL coordinator hat on. So as Nivedita and Prince discussed about the knowledge brokering processes that they have applied both in rural and urban areas, I think in my case, as I've been coordinating this project since May 2020, and till now I have published at least 30 stories. And the major component that most of the stories had was the knowledge brokering part, because the COVID-19 is the novel coronavirus, and nobody really had that idea on how to deal with it and so on. So the knowledge brokering was a very important part to tackle the situation. And I would say the local communities, and particularly women and youth, had the major role to play in terms of brokering the knowledge. And they did it in many layers. For example, the first one being they played the brokering role vertically between the government and the local communities. So most of the governments had their own ways of disseminating knowledges, but unfortunately, most of them couldn't reach to the most marginals or the most poorest of the poor communities. So these local leaders, particularly women and youth, have collaborated with different government agencies and networks, and then sort of translated these informations and messages in the local languages, local dialects, and then disseminated within the communities in various ways. For example, the use of WhatsApp group was one of the most common approaches that have been taken, particularly in countries like India, Bangladesh, and Nepal. And then in African countries, the use of local songs or maybe the group discussions maintaining the hygiene protocols were also one of the common ways of disseminating knowledge. And then the dissemination was being done horizontally as well. For example, within the communities, there were certain health workers or nurses, or maybe those who have indigenous knowledges or herbal, any sort of techniques, indigenous techniques. They also disseminated within the community to those who are not aware of this, and that's how they dealt with the situation. And apart from knowledge, I would say they also played the role of broker of resources. For example, the hygiene kits or maybe food. A lot of groups, particularly in India and Bangladesh, the women groups, they collected money, or in some cases used their personal money to sort of collect the food materials and cooked food and distribute it among people, among migrants who couldn't go back to their countries and whatnot. So I would say the knowledge brokering and at the same time resource brokering, particularly by women and youth in various ways, was the most interesting and the most prominent responses that we have received through the stories. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Shahrin. It just is very interesting to see the critical need for knowledge brokers in an emergency situation. Okay, great. I think we will now ask, it seems that, you know, in this knowledge brokering work, it can't all be easy. And it strikes me that it's very challenging work and you could encounter many stumbling blocks along the way. So Nivedita, I'd like to ask you, could you tell us some of the top 2 barriers or challenges that you've encountered in this work, this knowledge brokering work, and facilitating these change processes in the peri-urban context? Give us a sense of what's really challenging you. I think also just before Nivedita, I think Padlet, there's a difficulty with Padlet. Yeah, sorry, Nivedita, go for it.
No problem, Lisa. Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Because when we talk about this particular issue of peri-urban ecosystems and the resilience that they lend to urban areas, this is not an easy context given in India, because still the peri-urban areas suffer from clear conceptualizations, clear definitions, clear notions of what these areas are all about, what are the boundaries, what are the demarcations, and most importantly, the governance mechanisms. Uh, we still operate in 2 different silos. One is the urban, and another stream is the rural. There is nothing called peri-urban informal governance mechanism structures in India. But they being a very important area, and there are so many examples, so many climate-induced disasters that India has seen, which has clearly established this whole connect between peri-urban and urban resilience, that this issue is becoming increasingly important. So knowledge brokering around this whole issue, which is actually not present so much in the formal governance structure, though it is very well organized, though it is very well recognized by the government officials at all levels, but it suffers due to lack of governance mechanisms, and hence the knowledge brokering becomes quite a challenging task. So one level is that because the issue is not recognized, it becomes very challenging. The second thing also we saw is that uh, since there is no backup support on this whole issue, there are no proper government directives, no instructions or orders, government orders. Therefore, knowledge brokering becomes important and also challenging both ways. Another thing is what we also saw is that the knowledge products that we are generating in this whole process of knowledge brokering, actually, if they are very generic in nature, they don't seem to be very productive for knowledge brokering processes. They need to be concise, they need to be succinct, they need to be very brief, to the point, and maybe different tools can be used to develop these products on different formats, which are useful for the policymakers to understand. And yes, these are some of the challenges that I can think of immediately. And one last thing I would like to add is that also now increasingly the community-led models or experience-based knowledge, I mean, knowledge brokering based on field-level experiences are actually gaining much more currency in the country rather than more of a theoretical knowledge or something of that sort. So yeah, so these are the some of the key challenges that I would like to focus upon.
Great, thank you. Very interesting point about the experience-based knowledge. That definitely seems to be very much a growing issue at the moment, and the need for more experience-based knowledge and sharing. Okay, great. Prince, can you let us know some of the challenges that you've encountered in doing this work?
Okay, so thank you, Lisa. So with the challenges that we have faced, I think most especially has to do with literacy issue, especially when you're working at the local level. We realize that a lot of information has been produced, which is outside of the local level, which means that most of them are in English. Very quality, very good information that can easily be accessible, and can be very helpful at the local level. But unfortunately, because of literacy issues, you're unable to access those information. A typical example is when the Ministry of Agriculture, national level, produced very good videos where for all the crops, from the planting to the harvesting to storage. These were very good information, but they were all in English and they were all on YouTube. So you wouldn't expect a local farmer to go to YouTube and go and eat. The person doesn't even have access to internet in the first place. So only those who can access or who have access to internet or who can even understand English or can have opportunity of being able to understand whatever is out there, they will get the benefit from it. So that's one. The second one also is the language barrier, which goes together. So the language barrier here, it's especially when we as researchers or implementers wanting to bring in something that communicates something to the people, we have to go through interpret those who can interpret it to us to be given to the people. And sometimes there is this distortion where the person may not be able to communicate exactly what you have or what you intend to communicate. And these are some of the challenges that I think that we face. But at the same time, these two challenges also brings out an opportunity, which maybe I'll talk about in what are some of the things that enables us to be able to do what we do. So even though there are challenges that we faced, but they also became some of the opportunities where it helps us to be creative in the way we advanced sharing knowledge with the local people.
Great. Great that your challenge became the opportunity. Super. So that's a nice segue to our next question about Nivedita. What have been the top two enabling factors for your success? You don't necessarily have to list all your successes, but can you give us a sense of why things have gone well when they've gone well? What has enabled those things to go well in your work in the peri-urban context? I hope you don't have unmuting problems now. Thank you, co-host.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa. Yes, as I was talking about the challenges, I think in the same on the same issues, I will talk about how we have turned them into successes. The first and foremost enabling factor that we see for our success is the practice-based experience, the field-based experience that we generated, so that we can showcase how this whole connect between the peri-urban ecosystems and urban resilience is actually connected on the ground, on the field, and it is not only theoretical. So I think one of the most important enabling factor was our ground level experience, our field implementation projects, which helped us also instilled the confidence in us to advocate about this issue, to build knowledge around this whole issue. And the second enabling factor, I would say, was, of course, the collaboration with the strategic institutions, wherein this whole idea of peri-urban resilience was strived to be mainstream, because in India we have a very clear disaster management structure, right from the national level till up to the village level. So we have the National Institute of the National Disaster Management Authority, we have the State Disaster Management Authority, we have the district level management authority, and which trickles down to developing the village development, village disaster development plans, etc., and all that. So we saw this was a very formal stream wherein the eco DRR, or I would say the peri-urban resilience and peri-urban and urban resilience connect could be well mainstreamed. That is why since this was a knowledge brokering project, we collaborated with the apex institution in the country, the National Institute of Disaster Management, which is responsible for the capacity building and policy planning on climate and disaster related issues. And hence, this whole strategic collaboration worked for us. They came on board, and the buy-in from the top level was there for this whole issue. So I think that was another big enabling factor which helped us in gaining or attaining the degree of success that we have been able to achieve.
Great, thank you very much, Nivedita. Great that your challenges also became successes and enabling factors. Prince, can you give us a sense of how you were creative and managed to overcome the barriers?
Okay, thank you, Lisa. So for us, as I mentioned earlier in the barriers, especially issues around language issues and literacy, we try to leverage on already existing tools, which I think I've already mentioned, or in a sense also try to modify them, those tools, which will be both acceptable to the local people and also acceptable to what we want to do as a group, especially with the songs and with the radio programs. I think they were very useful because the radio programs were run in the local language. And before we went to that approach, we were able to engage with the local stakeholders, which is also a very key thing, engaging a lot with the local stakeholders to be able to understand where we are coming from, the information that we have, before they go out there to be able to share with the broader community folks on the radio. And also with the song production too, we engage with the women group who are also usually produce these songs a lot. We give them topics, and then we give them the topics and then a theme. They produce the songs and they wrote the songs. Actually, we went through the process with them, and then they came up with a very good one. We produced a music video out of it, and I think it's something that it's really, really cool. The next thing I would say is that I think for personally, I think one of the things that actually I would say has been a key enabling factor is having a project or a team that is not afraid to fail, I should say, because that is what brought out a lot of creativity. Because this is not, especially for example, the mobile app, this is not the first time we've tried, but we realized that I think we needed a different way to be able to do that. And that actually brought out the very quality and the good work that we did. So the team wasn't afraid to fail. One of the things that they will say, especially Professor Chris Gordon, who is very key, will say, just go try it and then let's see the outcome. And I think that is what helped us to be able to do a lot more that became more successful. So we're not afraid, we're just going in, we have an idea, we work with the local people, let's see, if it fails, that's fine, we learn from it. If you succeed, that's okay. That's also a good thing. So that is where I think our strength actually lies, not afraid to fail. And so it helps us to be more creative and innovative in the things that we did. And also the last one I'll say is partnership with local government agencies. That's very key, because for continuity's sake, because it's a project, so the project would end in a way. But because we have partnership with the local government, especially the Ministry of Agriculture, the Department of Planning, which a number of local stakeholders, this helped us to be able to maintain the efforts, especially with the Climate Advisory Resource Centers. We made it a point to make sure that the centers are within the Department of Agric offices. And this actually helped to be able to sustain and maintain that particular process. So with that, I think it's been also a key factor in part of our success moving forward. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you. Some very important lessons there. So now we are soon out of time, but before before we end the show, it would be great to leave everyone with some very concrete advice for doing better knowledge brokering. So if all our guests, our talk show guests, not panel members, could you tell the audience what top 2 tips you would give to a knowledge broker, a change agent, who's seeking to enhance community resilience? So that's the top 2 tips you would give to a knowledge broker or a change agent who's seeking to enhance community resilience. And perhaps we can start with Shahrin. We can start with you, since we haven't heard from you for a while. Can you give us some top 2 tips based on
Yes.
the COVID response?
Yes, definitely. So if I have to say my top 2 preferences, I would say first one would be definitely, as Prince said, the partnership with the local government agencies, because I have seen through the stories that many communities can take some responses and can initiate some practices by their own, but after a point they get stuck because they don't, if they don't receive those support or partnership from the local governments, they can't necessarily expand the initiative or maybe scale up. So the partnership within the local agencies and local government is key for a change agent to bring out the changes. And definitely the finance and skills are important, but I would also say the social capital is the most necessary ingredient in the, to make things happen. Because if the communities have certain relationship trust within themselves, and if they trust each other and can come forward to help each other and have that sense of belongingness, that would definitely help the change agents to bring out the better sides easier. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Nivedita, what would you say? What are your top 2 tips?
Yeah, 2 quick things on tips for knowledge brokering. One is that the one very important thing which I think Prince also highlighted was the language that we are in which we are trying to communicate. So when I say a language, it does not only mean the language per se, but also keeping it very simple in a way that it is easily comprehensible, especially by the government offices. So the language of the whole knowledge products that we are trying to bring out is quite important. Easily understood. The second thing is that since we are looking for policy mainstreaming and capacity building around these knowledge products, we should try and engage with strategic institutions wherein this can be well mainstreamed in the already existing government programs and schemes. Otherwise, if we do something very different and parallel to it, it doesn't much work actually in the Indian context. It has to be mainstream somehow, and for that we need to build our products and engage with those institutions, those agents, or those I would say stakeholders who can take this forward, who can mainstream this in their existing programs and schemes.
Fantastic, thank you. So strategic partnerships coming up again. And Prince, last but not least.
Yes, thank you. So I think they've already mentioned some of the things, but I also add that, as I said earlier on, there should be a lot more engagement with local stakeholders. That is one of the things, like a lot more engagement, quite a lot. And then also through that engagement, there's also a need to look out for champions, local champions, or community champions, because these people are very strategic and key in terms of driving people to be able to follow them. I should say they are leaders, and they are able to mobilize people around. They are able to mobilize a community around to be able to do the things that you wish to implement at the local level. And these are some of the champions that, for us, we were able to target them and bring them together, as we call them local. We call them local committee. Like there are 5 of them, and we brought them together from different communities. And these were very strategic in driving most of the ideas and then the things that we also wanted to share with the communities. And they are also the ones running the radio program and maintaining some of the facilities that we have. Another thing too is that also look for, as again, partners. By partners, I mean, for example, when we're looking out for the previous, wanted to develop a mobile app previously, we were looking out for partners all over the place. We spoke to different people and all that, and lo and behold, we had someone that could help us. Even though we are not working with that partner for now, but that experience that we learned from, I personally learned from that partner, was able to help us build the current mobile app that we have at the moment. So whatever ideas that come to mind, look for partners that can help you be able to achieve those goal or vision or whatever ideas that you have in mind. And yeah, everything is possible. Thank you.
Thank you. It's interesting with all the mention of partnerships, it strikes me that knowledge brokers have to be extremely good networkers. Okay, great. So we actually have about 7 minutes left for this talk show to continue. So I think we can probably take a couple burning questions. We are going to have to finish at 2 p.m. GMT time and move on. So if there are any burning questions for our talk show guests, please let me know. Put them in the chat. I'll give it sort of 10 or 15 seconds to hear from you and any questions you might have for our guest show, our guests. Otherwise, we will move on. Okay, nothing coming through. Okay, going, gone. Something from Albert and from Cecil. Okay, we're getting lots coming through. Okay, we're going to take 3 questions. Albert, can the panelists reflect on whether they see knowledge brokering as a collective process as opposed to an individual job description? So is it more a collective process or something that one person does? Then we have another question about who the partners are for the app, for taking the app national. And then a question for Prince and all. You mentioned failure as an acceptable part of your experience. And how does this influence funders? So your choice, yeah, whether funders are allowing you to fail and try again and learn as you go. So let's perhaps we'll.
So I would like to reflect on the first question.
Great, Nivedita, please go for it. Nivedita, are you there?
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you. You can answer.
Okay. Yeah, a bit unstable connection here, so sorry for that. So I would like to reflect on the first question that has come up on whether knowledge brokering is a collective process or an individual job description. Fully agree that it is definitely a collective process, and in fact, not only at the organizational level, it is a collective process, but also, like in our experience, right from the beginning of the knowledge brokering process, we engaged with the different stakeholders for whom we are building up this knowledge, and also from where this knowledge is being generated. So the knowledge generators, knowledge brokers, and knowledge users came together to evolve this whole knowledge brokering process so that it is meaningful and useful for the knowledge users. So definitely, yeah, agreed on that, that it is completely a collective job and not an individual job.
Okay. Yes. So I also want to touch on the failure question about the failure. So I think it's I could say that what is called the acceptable failure, and yeah. So what I mean by that is it's more like the challenge that you encountered whilst you were trying to implement the process, and not just leaving it there, but what are the solutions that you think can work out? So if you are working on something and you come to a point where you are unable to continue again, and just leaving it there, it's not, for me, it's not acceptable. But what are the solutions? What are the things that you can bring on? What are the way forward? What are other pathways to be able to achieve that? And I think that is where we're able to cross over some of these challenges, which, quote and unquote, it can also be called failure, depending on how you look at them. So that's what I can say with that. So you hit a wall, and then you look at what opportunity can I use to skip over that wall or to go through the wall, and that is what helped us to be able to move. So without proposals to be able to go over the problem or the failure, I think the funders wouldn't have actually helped us to continue what we did in the previous one. Yeah. So being able to propose something new beyond what you failed at, I think it's a key here.
Try and try again.
Maybe I can respond to the last question, which was on how can we promote knowledge sharing within the government systems for community resilience. I think this has been one of the topics that my center has been looking at very with utmost importance, because in a country like Bangladesh, where the policies and over the administration and the governance is mostly top-down approach, it is extremely important for them to have the knowledge about the grassroots as well. So there, in such cases, organizations like ours or people like ours have the role to play to sensitize this government or officers or policymakers about the grassroots level realities and the promotion of knowledge that we through in the beginning that Lucia was sharing different forms of knowledge brokering. So either through maybe the papers, the policy briefs, or maybe the workshops, the interactive workshops with government officials and policymakers, we could also sensitize them regarding the grassroots realities and how to build a community resilience together.
Great, that was perfect timing. And we are now at 2 p.m. So 2 p.m. GMT. I know we're not in that time zone now. South Africa isn't in that time zone. I think I'm going to now hand over to Lucia, who's been recording all this rich discussion and all these wonderful contributions, and she's going to share some of her recording with us.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks to the speakers. It was a great discussion. I'm just sharing my screen. There were some hiccups with the Padlet initially, so apologies for those of you who tried, but it seems like it was actually coming from Padlet. After refreshing it about 10 times, it started working. So I am actually going to be sharing then some of the things that I heard from the speakers. And I will start from the barriers. I will not go through the processes and approaches because I think that will come through as I speak about the other three aspects. So in terms of like challenges to brokering that we heard about, we have the example from India where like, for example, the peri-urban areas are not well recognized and they don't have these clear formal or governance mechanisms. So we see some challenges are often in the governance realm when there are disconnects, for example, vertically. We also heard that often there is an absence of like knowledge products that are understandable enough or concise enough for policymakers to be able to further recognize, for example, the importance of these areas. We also heard about like the missing like experience-based knowledge, which often is not valued even if it is there. So so that is another like gap that there is. We heard about the challenge of literacy levels and the languages, like a language being a barrier. So sometimes like information coming from outside is in a language that is not understood either because it's a different language or because it's not simple or concise, or maybe in an inaccessible format. For example, if it's on YouTube, like people do not always have internet. In terms of enabling factors that can help us to deal with some of these challenges, as Lisa said, and as all of you repeated multiple times, like partnerships are really critical. So like I heard about different types of partnership, for example, with local government agencies. In the case of Ghana, this has really helped also in this institutionalization of activities for the longer term, so that they will be carried out also once projects are finished. So I think that is really quite critical. Let me go on to this one, another type of partnership like that Nivedita mentioned, like with the disaster management authorities, because they have like a well-established governance mechanism. It sounds like a well-decentralized structure from national to local level. Therefore, the collaboration with them was quite strategic because that helped to decentralize the peri-urban issues. So again, like identifying which type of partnership with whom is something quite critical as a knowledge brokering role, and that helped with the capacity building. So let us see also, I liked what Prince said about like learning from failure and not being able to afraid, just going out and trying things and seeing what the outcome will be. I think like lots of sessions recently like say like how important it is to do this. And then also the importance of leveraging existing tools that communities already use that are well accepted. For example, for the dissemination of information, we talked about songs or radio. So I think it's quite critical to use something that we know already works and not to reinvent the wheel with something different, or use existing groups like women groups that already have like a strong structure. Then in terms of like establishing like a practice-based knowledge, you know, we were like one of the challenges was its absence. So like to develop these field-based experiences and document them, then that also instills the confidence then to further advocate about the issues once they're well documented. And somebody, thank you, added about the importance of knowledge co-production and really engaging community actors. So in terms of tips, like we heard, this was just at the end, Shahrin was talking about like sensitizing government about like what communities are already doing to enhance their resilience. And this is particularly important when we have this top-down approach that is prominent. Knowledge brokering is a collective process, we heard, but yeah, the actual tips that came from the panel were to look for partners that can help in achieving goals and vision. We heard enough about this. We need more engagement with local stakeholders and really identifying community champions that have the leadership to drive like activities and ideas and to mobilize people. We have to like work to mainstream our issues into existing programs and activities and systems. Once again, rather than rebuilding, that will ensure sustainability. Once again, it ties to institutionalization of issues. We need to work in a language that is easily comprehensible. And lastly, the importance of social capital. So like really like, yeah, where we have trust and a sense of belongingness, it's so much easier to work. So like that is something really to be harnessed. Yeah, and I won't go again to bore you with more partnership issues, but I think from here, like having given you this this brief summary, we can move to the breakout groups. So we are, yeah, about 50 participants. So we will have like maybe 8 or so participants in each breakout group. You will all be allocated randomly. And the question that will be addressed is, how do you think knowledge brokering can really better support the resilience of vulnerable groups? So I think we have a lot of like food for thought coming from the panel, from the summary and Padlet. So please, yeah, do enjoy the next 25 45 minutes that you will have with the facilitator in each group. And we will then be reconvened. You will have a couple of warnings about how much time is left, but we will then have a feedback from each of the groups. So yeah, let's form now the breakout groups and talk to you in a short while.
Hafiz, please form the breakout groups now.
Hi, everyone. I see that you're all trickling back in. I am quickly typing our feedback from the breakout sessions, but if everybody's already back in, maybe we can start to hear from everybody. I do see that Prince's group has yet to fill in our slide, but I think let us start to go through some feedback, or should I maybe give you a minute? But I see we have lost a couple of participants. But
hi, Lucia.
Oh yes.
So yes. So I'm on my phone. So filling in the slide would be a bit, but I have the point as well.
Okay,
I don't
no
know whether
problem.
Ima also picked some points to be able to fill that in.
Okay, that sounds great. So maybe if Emma is able to help at all, or otherwise, Prince, also you can feel free to just report back without the typing in. We can just hear the report back from you.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I also still have to type in my last one, but maybe let's start with why don't we start with feeding back from group 3, that I see that Charlotte is the most organized among all of us. And so maybe we can hear what are like the top 3 responses that came out from your group addressing this question about like how can knowledge brokering enhance the resilience of vulnerable groups?
Okay. Okay, so in our case, I think the first one that the first one I would say, it's about it's about the context, very contextual, because what's working one place may not work in another place based on the economic, social, locational background context. So being able to identify which context that you are working in and how you be able to bring ideas or how you be able to work within that context is very helpful in helping knowledge brokering in terms of helping vulnerable groups to be more resilient. The next one, I would say it's also one of the key things which we mentioned, I think in the panel discussion, it didn't come up more, was about experiential learning, which has to do with peer-to-peer learning, whether it's local stakeholders learning from local stakeholders or experts, quote unquote, experts learning from experts. I think which is also part of the key in terms of knowledge brokering. So it's not just a one-way stream where it's experts trying to share information with local stakeholders, but also opening themselves up to also learn from each other as experts, and also creating the opportunities where local stakeholders can also learn from each other. I think the other one that I would mention is also this came up as part of our discussions where we talked about knowledge, like local knowledge, the importance of local knowledge, because usually when we are talking about knowledge transfer, we are looking at the scientific knowledge and how it helps the local stakeholders to be more resilient. But also there are local knowledge that are also available that are helpful to help communities also be more resilient. And we should not lose sight of those important local knowledge that are being used in various places. In mentioning local knowledge, I would just lastly mention that there is also the question that came up, or the discussion that came up in our group saying, mentioning that if you are bringing in local knowledge or even any other knowledge, in the idea of sorting out the authenticity of that knowledge. The fact that there is a mechanism or process of knowledge brokering doesn't mean that any knowledge should go through the process or any knowledge should be transferred. The ability or the mechanism to be able to sort out how authentic, how genuine this information is also very critical, especially when you are bringing different streams of both local knowledge and expert knowledge and different knowledge systems from different places, there's also need to be a mechanism for sorting out quality content or quality information for sharing. I think this is some of the things that we shared. But just this last one, I think it's a bonus one, I would say. One of our group members mentioned, Simeon mentioned about knowledge brokering and knowledge transfer. And I think in the discussion, she mentioned that knowledge transfer, it's more a better term to use because it's just a flow of knowledge, an exchange of knowledge, not just one-sided, but from both local to external and external to local. So we learn from each other and also we share with each other. So that is like a more term that she would, I think would be much more appropriate for, yeah. So basically that is some of the things that we mentioned. Yeah. Thank you.
Sounds great, Prince. Thank you. It sounds like you had, yeah, very rich discussions in that group. We tried to capture some of the, just the basic top level ideas as you were speaking. Sounds good. Shall we move on to Charlotte's group?
Great. Yeah, sure. Thanks. I think actually, a lot of things that Prince raised resonated with some of the examples we shared as a group as well. So I think that the first example that came to mind of how can knowledge brokering enhance resilience is a lot of the climate information that we have in climate models is typically, it exists, but it's not always available or very accessible. And so the role of the knowledge broker can kind of classically fill this role of taking the information that's there and making it more available and accessible. And what that means is trying to translate it so that it's kind of, it's action orientated so that it helps inform decision making rather than just sort of laying the data out there. But that the role of the knowledge broker is in understanding, I suppose sometimes it can be downscaling that data, but also supporting it to inform the decisions that need to be made. So that was one example. We then discussed how knowledge brokering can sometimes also be communities taking the lead. There was an example we talked about from Lusaka in which communities actually led a lot of the data collection around their neighborhoods, and that this data, in partnership with universities who sort of helped to process and clean this data, could then be presented to decision makers. And that also part of this sort of co-production of knowledge extends to co-implementation. And so if you start from co-producing that knowledge from the ground up when it comes to implementing, the communities had savings, which they contributed to the solutions that they had helped produce. And so that was a kind of different process of knowledge brokering. And the last example we shared was one from Cape Town in a case of also communities needing to innovate in the face of challenges with COVID and access to food, and a partnership that formed between them and Soil for Life in Cape Town, which is an NGO that has a lot of knowledge and experience on growing your own food and access to seeds and compost. And they formed this kind of partnership with communities who traveled to Soil for Life and created these WhatsApp groups where they could provide a kind of advisory service so that while the knowledge was being implemented, they were there to answer questions, look at photos of plants. And what's really interesting, I think, about this example is that it's sometimes the reverse of what we sometimes think of as knowledge brokering, which is that there's sort of knowledge that then informs practice, but in this sense, practice was actually informing theory and has contributed to have a lot to ideas about how food systems work and resilience. So that's it. Those are our top takeaways from our discussion.
Wow, sounds great. Yeah, so particularly we're talking about community resilience, and I think there are some nice pointers in the second two, the last two, let's say, responses. Yeah. Okay, let's go on to Shahrin, please.
Yes, thank you. I think I'll go really quickly because most of the points are sort of echoing with what my group has mentioned. So the first one was that the knowledge brokering, the change agents or the knowledge brokers also help mobilizing the resources and helps putting together all the information or and the resource in the right place, because they have the information about the locality and who are the most marginal and who are in need, so they can very well drive the resources or materials to the ones who are the most vulnerable or the who need it the most. um, Second was very interesting, and it was on the importance of tailor-made information that helps communities to build the resilience, because I think my entire group unanimously said that it's not only the information that could help the communities, it has to be in their local language, it has to be communicated in such a way that the communities can also absorb and act accordingly. So that was, and the use of interactive medias or interactive platforms, or maybe something like the cartoons or pictures, or maybe through the radio shows, through the group discussions, in such a way that the communities are already accustomed to. These ways can be really handy in terms of disseminating the tailored information. And another important was on fighting misinformation, that the knowledge brokers or the change agents can also play the role in terms of breaking the myths and knowledges, and can drive the authentic and accurate information to the communities, and hence can build the resilience of these vulnerable groups. And finally, the point was on the co-creation or generation of knowledge together with the local communities. As Prince was saying, that instead of having these quote unquote expert groups or the researchers or the donors being the only the people who have been disseminating the knowledge, rather there should be the co-creation and co-generation of knowledge together with the local community, so that they can be benefited with the produced knowledge. Thank you.
Sounds great. Yeah. So we're really seeing all along the spectrum, no, like of knowledge brokering, these different points are appearing and filling in, like from information, mediation, and translation, knowledge translation to more co-production. Rahina?
So I'll go. Rahina wasn't able to make it for that breakout session.
Oh, thank you,
so
Amanda.
Sure, no problem. So one of the main things that came out was around the need for communities, local communities, to have allies in order for them to be able to speak for themselves and negotiate for themselves, but rather than through other entities. The issue around how do we legitimize learning to make sure that the voices of local communities are at the center of the conversation and not pushed aside, because knowledge fundamentally is a power issue. It concerns issues of who produces it, who brokers it. So communities on their own need to, it's very easy for them to lose their voice because of the power dynamics at play, and therefore having allies in the form of local universities, for example, would be a good strategy to make sure that their voices are heard and they are at the center of all conversations. And another thing that came out was around the need to decentralize climate finance, and the need for, in this sense, the need for communities to receive technical support with regards to decentralizing climate finance. So how do we bring in climate finance specialists to local communities in order to build their capacity in this regard? Because there's also the issue of how building capacity at the local level does fall outside, the expertise and the responsibility of specialists in most sense. So how do we make sure that different groups, different types of people are brought into the conversation in order to build capacity of local communities, particularly around something as important as climate finance? And how do we move away from operating in silos in the knowledge brokering space? And the other thing which is
Amanda, may I ask you for the last one to be super quick, because I noticed that we are starting to run out of time, and I have not been a good facilitator to tell you all to just give us the high level response and not everything, please.
no problem. I think the last one has been mentioned already. It's around context and the need to better understand context and to learn to build up conversations from a bottom up rather than to always communicating and sharing knowledge from a top-down perspective.
Great.
And the importance of being in listening mode when sure.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, would you like to go super quickly through your group?
Yeah, sure. So ours was, yeah, very similar issues. The co-creation came up very strongly. It was what we spoke about the most, I think, in terms of not sort of coming with research into a community, having a one-way discussion, and just understanding that the knowledge broker plays a role in kind of bridging these different knowledge systems and epistemologies and ways of understanding the world. There's a sort of big bridging translation function in terms of knowledge systems. Number two being, there's also a role to play for the knowledge broker in enabling local communities to really define and own their own knowledge and data. So one also assumes that they know the boundaries of their data, what they have and what they own, what can really empower them, but maybe that's not always the case. So I think there was quite an important point about really helping communities to understand their own data and knowledge, so that because data and knowledge is power, so that they can sort of be more self-determining with their knowledge. And the third one was also about using non-verbal forms of engagement, film, theater, song, different local ways, different local mechanisms of brokering and going beyond sort of text forms and those sort of more traditional forms of sharing knowledge. That's it.
Great, thank you. Yeah, wow, such richness has emerged. Maybe to tell you very briefly from my group, we said that knowledge brokers really need to learn how to navigate power and political dynamics, because these can be a real barrier. We talked about how it is important, especially if you're like a foreign development NGO, to partner with local organizations who are well rooted in the system, have the social networks and connections and capital, so that like they can be a real conduit. And then to create a platform, like as knowledge brokers, like for communities to advocate for their own issues with government without us needing to do that for them. Like they're able to, but we can help to just create this platform. So let us stop here with this sharing back. Thank you to everyone. I think you have had like some great discussions, but I don't want to further delay the rest. We just have one last thing to do. Last but not least, so Albert Norstrom from the Global Resilience Partnership is now going to be sharing a few lessons that have emerged from the work that Shahrin presented about the voices from the front line. So like really like how have grassroots communities been active during the time of COVID to really increase the resilience of their communities. So like we see a lot of leadership has emerged, and there are some lessons that have been captured by the Global Resilience Partnership in partnership with ICCCAD and CDKN. So we'll just share some of those, and then with that the session will come to a close. We'll have a final like very quick poll, so please do not leave us before the end. But Albert, let me pass on the microphone to you.
Thanks, Lucia, and I'll keep it very short, so we'll have time for the poll afterwards. I'll just quickly share my screen. Thanks for the very rich discussions we've been having so far. It's always extremely invigorating to sit and listen in. Like Lucia says, I'll be just summarizing some of the key findings and recommendations that have just come out in a policy brief that was published today, focusing on the resilience of local communities and the lessons we've learned from COVID-19. And like mentioned before, all of this builds on the Voices from the Frontline initiative. A small subset of us engaged in this initiative David, Emily, and Faisal, thought it'd be interesting to look a bit under the hood of the interviews and the stories coming up in this initiative, to specifically focus what lessons are coming from these stories when it comes to what are the social factors that underline resilience. David was going to present this. Unfortunately, he's behind the internet blockade, which is happening now in Uganda because of the election. So I just stepped in the last minute. Basically, what we did is we took an existing framework developed by Josh Sinner and other colleagues of how you can conceptualize adaptive capacity or social dimensions of resilience. Basically, this framework says that social dimensions of resilience are things like assets, the natural, physical, human, financial things that people draw upon, the flexibility to change strategies, the ability for social organization that allows cooperation, collective action, knowledge sharing, learning to recognize and respond to change, certain behavioral and cognitive factors such as risk attitudes, personal experience, social norms, and the agency to determine whether to change or not. So these are the 6 dimensions, the 6 social dimensions of resilience. We broke them up, developed a set of indicators, and then looked at 15 of these interviews from communities that had been included in the Voices from the Frontline. And you see the communities included in this study in the map here. In parentheses, you have the number of communities per country. So really quickly, just to wrap up, and this is interesting because a lot of the key findings or recommendations we found, the 3 of them, really tie into knowledge brokering in profound ways. So the first key finding and recommendation is that, if you're interested in bolstering resilience, if you're a government, development agency, a civil society, you want to do that, you have to target multiple social domains. So resilience is not only about, communities having access to capital, it's also about people having the flexibility to change strategies, the willingness or agency to influence change happening, and the capacity to organize themselves collectively in order to mobilize responses. If you're coming from the outside, you want to bolster resilience, you need to be wary of these things because sometimes you can crowd existing things out. Collective action and community-based organizations can sometimes be crowded out by the provision of certain types of government services, for example, building assets. So you have to be aware of these things. The second one is that programs and policies to build resilience need to support the actions of community-based organizations and treat them as key partners. So what we saw from the Voicing from the Frontline, and Shahrin has noted to that, is that community-based organizations, women's groups, youth groups, and different grassroots movements are key enablers of other social domains of resilience. They play a key role in assessing the needs of communities, delivering basic services, but they also function as trusted knowledge brokers to ensure reliable two-way information flows between vulnerable groups, local authorities, this vertical knowledge brokering and horizontal knowledge brokering that Shahrin alluded to during the panel discussions. And finally, critically, again, we spoke a lot about it in the panels, is that social knowledge brokering builds trust and social cohesion. What we found also is that resilient strategies really need reservoirs of trust and social cohesion. So, if you want to intervene and bolster resilience, you need to intervene in ways that foster these forms of social capital, right? This could include focus groups, social events, but it could also, actually require investing in knowledge brokering as a process if you're interested then as an outside agent trying to bolster resilience of local communities. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks for just giving me the chance here to reflect a bit about that. The brief is found on these URLs, and if you're interested in more, just read it and then get in touch. Thanks, Lucia, and thanks everyone.
Thank you.
I'm just trying to unshare my screen here. There, now I got it. Okay.
Great. No, but thank you. Those were, very interesting. And I see how they, connect very well to everything that we have talked about. So, I think this link between knowledge brokering, like as a tool to really enhance resilience is really something important that we can keep thinking about. I think we'll go back to the recording of the session and really dig up more because there's a lot that we can really learn from today. So with that, we're going to be concluding. I would like to thank again all the speakers. Before we do so, we have a quick Mentimeter that we would like you to please respond to see whether you feel you have learned something new today and It is going to be put now in the chat box, the link. So if you could respond to that on your way out, and we'll also have like a poll. So I think we'll launch those like nearly in parallel. But yeah, like those are the final two asks that we have of you. But otherwise, yeah, thank you to everyone for your involvement in the chat, in the breakout groups, and yeah, very large thanks, of course, to our speakers. So here is for the results, and the Mentimeter is on the chat box. So please do go and share with us like what you have learned today. For example, we see the importance of trust. That is something that in knowledge brokering keeps coming up, and yeah, how that's a real enabler to being able to make change happen. So there are various media that we can use for knowledge brokers to enhance community resilience. We have definitely seen that in the report from the breakout groups. Perspective. I'm not sure if that means importance of different perspectives. We have similar to what was said previously, like lots of alternative communication avenues potentially. I like also the one about misinformation that Shahrin reported on. It's not just about providing the right information, but also like fighting misinformation, engaging people, putting them first. Knowledge exchange is key and not a one-way flow. Importance of grassroots approaches. Interesting discussions on knowledge packaging and how to broker it. Valuing experiential learning at the grassroots. Great. I think that we see that you're all reflecting and responding. Like, please continue to do so. But I think we should also launch the poll, because I'm afraid that many of you may have commitments. I know there are other meetings, like as part of the Gobeshona conference, other sessions starting. So I don't want you to be late for that. But we can launch also the poll. That's just like a one-click answer. So
yes,
we can.
Hafiz, if you could launch the poll now.
Here we go. So this will be the last thing, but I will keep in the meantime reading. Don't be afraid of failure and the importance of creativity. I think that's a very important point. Keep it light and simple, and with everyone part of the process. Peer exchanges to facilitate knowledge sharing, partnering with community agencies. Great. Okay, so thank you once again to everyone for taking part, and enjoy the rest of the conference this week.